national inquiry into the grooming gangs. And I welcome that we have finally reached this point. And we must remember that this is not a victory for politicians, especially the ones like the Home Secretary who had to be dragged to the prison for the Prime Minister. This is a victory for the survivors who have been calling for this for years. I have been speaking to many who do not have confidence that a government that ignored their concerns will deliver. But before I turn to the detail of the Home Secretary's statement, I want to recognise the tireless work of those who refuse to let this issue be buried. Survivors like Fiona Goddard, who bravely waved for anonymity, and the parents of survivors like Marlon West, who I spoke to this morning, Maggie Oliver, whose courage in speaking truth to power has been instrumental in bringing us to this point. The late Andrew Morford, whose fearless journalism brought these crimes to light, Baroness Casey for her review, and Charlie Peters, who has consistently been a voice for the voiceless. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's handling of this scandal is an extraordinary failure of leadership. His judgment has once again been found wanting. Since being Prime Minister, he and the Home Secretary dismissed calls for an inquiry because they did not want to cause a stir. They accused those of us demanding justice for the victims of this scandal as, and I quote, jumping on a far-right bandwagon. It claimed the Prime Minister's official spokesman this weekend, shameful. It has been left to Conservatives time and time again to force this issue. Three times, Mr. Speaker, three times. They can mutter now, they all mutter now. Three times, Mr. Speaker, these Labour MPs voted against the national inquiry. Three times. Liberal Democrats didn't bother to vote at all, didn't bother to vote at all, asleep at the wheel. Labour MPs voted against the recent amendments to the Children's Bill. At committee stage of that bill, they voted again. At committee stage of the crime and policing.
It's just such a good example. It's a very serious debate. Temperature running high, but I suppose we don't want you to be pointing and choking and bowling in that way. And then,
Point and shout as much as they like. They know the truth as we on the side of the house. Three times, I will repeat myself, Mr. Speaker, three times. Labour MPs voted against the recent amendment to the Children's Bill. At committee stage of that bill, they voted against. At committee stage of the crime and policing bill, they voted against a national inquiry. And as Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister repeatedly ruled out a national inquiry to the chairs of all of these Labour MPs who are now pretending this is what they believe all along. And no doubt, the Home Secretary in her response to me will try and claim that the previous government did nothing. A wholly false assertion that she should not repeat today. The Conservative government took extensive action, starting with the original J report, commissioned in 2014 by the then Home Secretary Theresa May. A year later, she commissioned the independent investigation into child sexual abuse. And Sajid Javid commissioned ethnicity data collection in 2018. So it's wrong, as the Home Secretary said, to claim that ethnicity data collection had not been done. And I will remind her that the Foreign Secretary criticized Sajid Javid at the time, said he was bringing the Office of Home Secretary into disrepute and said he was pandering to the far right, but doing exactly what she said she's doing now. They should be ashamed of themselves. We accepted all the recommendations of that previous child sexual inquiry of 2022, except the ones to have a new cabinet minister, which would not have made any difference at all to the victims of this scandal. The Home Secretary claimed that the recommendations sat on the shelf. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker. We went further than those recommendations. It was the Conservatives who established the Grooming Gangs Task Force, which supported police forces to make 807 arrests for group-based child sexual exploitation last year. So don't tell me we did nothing. It is vital, Mr. Speaker, that this inquiry is robust, swift, and above all, independent. There are legitimate concerns about institutions investigating themselves, especially as some of the most egregious cases of institutional failure occurred in Labour-controlled authorities. They can moan as much as they like, Mr. Speaker, but the people out there believe that is why nothing has happened yet. In Greater Manchester, Operation Augusta was prematurely shut down. In Rotherham, under continued continuous labour control since 1974, we saw repeated failures. In Telford, where Labour has predominantly held power, the current MP initially rejected calls for an inquiry while serving as council leader. This inquiry must have teeth. It must start with known hotspots like Bradford and Rochdale, and I commend my honourable friend, the member for Keighley, for his persistent advocacy of this issue. We need clear commitments, Mr. Speaker. For example, will the inquiry examine the role of ethnicity in these crimes, confronting hard truths about potential cover-ups motivated by fears of appearing racist? There's no point then muttering, the Home Secretary said it herself. I spoke to the father of a survivor just this morning, and he told me the survivors need to have someone who is independent that they can go to and trust. It is no use them being forced to speak to the same authorities who ignored them in the first place. So will this inquiry ensure that no one, whether police officers, councillors, or council officials, is beyond scrutiny? The government's approach to the case review itself raises serious concerns. While the review's findings are crucial, we as legislators are sent here to make decisions, not to outsource the difficult ones. And delay that the survivors complained about. Mr. Speaker, we need answers to the following questions. The House deserves to know what changed the Prime Minister's mind from thinking that his dog whistle far-right politics is something he must do. When exactly did Baroness Casey submit her findings to Downing Street? And did the government request any changes to her report? Does she agree that anyone in authority who deliberately covered up these disgusting crimes should be prosecuted for misconduct in public office, and those prosecutions should happen alongside, not after, the inquiry? Because we believe that anyone in the police, local authorities, social services, or even the CPS who covered this up because they cared more about so-called community relations than about protecting vulnerable girls as young as 10 years old should be pursued. And we welcome her comments about perpetrators not being able to make asylum claims. I will remind the Home Secretary that we put forward an amendment to the Borders Bill, and she and all her colleagues voted against that very measure. So does she now agree that perpetrators should also not be able to make human rights claims to avoid deportation, and will she legislate to do that? Will the inquiry be concluded within 2 years, and will every one of the 50 towns affected be covered, including Bradford, which is still refusing to conduct an inquiry into this? And will those local inquiries have the power to summon witnesses, or is that power only for the national inquiry? And most critically, we need a clear timeline for conclusions and actions. The victims cannot wait another decade for justice. We should be able to do this in 2 years. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we didn't need to commission a report to tell us what we already knew. So will she apologise on behalf of herself, the Labour Party, and the Prime Minister for wasting so much time and voting against this, dismissing the concerns of the survivors? The House, the British public, and most importantly, the many brave survivors deserve clear answers from a government of dithering and delay.
To say to the Leader of the Opposition, I don't think she kind of read this report and the seriousness of its conclusions, because it sets out a timeline of failure from 2009 to 2025. Repeated reports and recommendations that were not acted on child protection, on police investigations, on ethnicity data, on data sharing, on support for victims. For 14 of those 16 years, her party was in government, including years when she was the Minister for Children and Families, then the Minister for Equality, covering race and ethnicity issues and violence against women and girls. And I didn't hear her raise any of these issues until January of this year. She will know the Prime Minister didn't just raise them, he acted on them, bringing the first referred to the Alexis James, Professor Alexis James, independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. I called for and strongly supported that inquiry party basis. We wanted that inquiry to work and supported its conclusions. But her party did absolutely nothing to implement those conclusions. Time and again, the policy is just sitting on the shelf. And it has taken this government now to bring forward the mandatory duty to. She says that we should ensure that people who have engaged in cover-ups should be prosecuted. I agree, and that is why this party is changing the law to make that possible. So cover-ups cannot happen, and so that people are held to account. She also know that the vote she referred to, she wanted to do, remember she put forward, would have wrecked the children's well-being and school bill. The very bill, which includes two of Baroness Casey's recommendations strengthening child protection, recommendations that she and her party refused to over 14 years. And I am sorry that she chose not to join in the apology to victims and survivors for decades of failure that was a cross-party apology in 2022. And it should be again if she really had victims' interests and the national interest at heart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I listened, I sat with a cold fury at what was coming out of the mouth of the Leader opposition. Much of it is beneath contempt. Can I commend today's statement? Can I commend her for commissioning a fiercely independent figure like Louise Casey to conduct this national audit, without which we would not have had today's outcome. In Rochdale, we know all too well how many years it's taken for victims to get the justice they deserve. They have waited many, many years to see these sick criminals locked up and put behind bars. But also, I mean, only last week we had 7 more of these perverts locked up in Rochdale, and that is a testimony to the police and the prosecution who finally got these cases together. But the victims also want accountability for anyone in position of authority, as she has said. Anyone who found out about this and failed to act or knew about it. So does she agree with me that no councillor of any political party, no social worker, no police officer, no council officer, and no ethnic group should hide from the fierce scrutiny of this national inquiry?
My honourable friend is right to raise the appalling case in his constituency where 7 people were convicted Friday, and he will know as well that there are further criminal investigations still ongoing as well, and it is shameful how long it has taken to get justice for those victims. I also agree with him that there can be no hiding from justice for anyone on this appalling issue where victims and survivors have been let down for far too long, and I would hope that this could be a cross-party process to support that.
Liberal Democrats spokesperson Lisa Small.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Child sexual abuse and exploitation are among the most abhorrent crimes imaginable, and we must all support every effort to deliver justice for victims and to prevent these vile acts from happening again. It is, of course, right that the government follows the recommendations of Baroness Casey's report, including a new national inquiry. Survivors must be at the heart of this process. Their voices, experiences and insights must shape both the inquiry and its outcome. And I would welcome hearing more from the Home Secretary on how she intends to ensure survivors are heard, respected and central to this view, building on their existing testimony without asking to repeat themselves and relive their abuse again and again. Mr. Speaker, the 7-year inquiry into child sexual abuse chaired by Professor Alexis James delivered its final report in 2022, and the government at the time delivered none of its recommendations, leaving survivors waiting for justice. In her remarks, the Home Secretary mentioned 2 of Professor James' recommendations being introduced through the crime and policing bill: mandatory reporting duty and aggravated offences for women offenders. But what does this new inquiry mean for the remaining recommendations?
Any new inquiry must be more than simple. It must be robust, victim-centred and capable of driving real change. A duty of candour would require public officials and authorities to cooperate fully with an inquiry like this. So it continues to be disappointing that the government has delayed bringing this forward. I ask the Home Secretary what is stopping the government from introducing a duty of candour via a Hillsborough law. Finally, now that Baroness Casey has completed her review, I welcome her appointment as chair of the Independent Commission into Adult Social Care. I trust she will bring to that hugely important role the same determination to challenge injustice and champion the voices of those too often left unheard. The honourable member makes about the seriousness of this crime. She is right too that we need to continue to implement the recommendations of the overarching inquiry into child abuse. The safeguarding minister updated the House before Easter on those recommendations and the actions we are taking forward on those. That a lot of the Home Office measures are already well underway as well. We will continue to do that. It's really important that we don't simply have recommendations sitting on shelves, that things have to be implemented. On the Hillsborough law, we are working at pace to get the details right and bring it before the House to understand that it needs to meet the expectations of the Hillsborough families as well as be right for the House too. And we will continue to work on the wider issues as well. Baroness Casey in her foreword says, if we got this right years ago, seeing these girls as children raped rather than wayward teenagers or collaborators in their abuse, collecting evidence of the data and acknowledging as a system that we did not do a good enough job, then I doubt we'd be in this place now. We lost a decade, we can't lose another one.
That's sharp.
Speaker, can I first thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for her leadership and commitment to get a grip on this issue. As a Member of Parliament and one of the largest constituencies, Muslim and Pakistani heritage people, Muslims, I know the sheer anger and condemnation that the vast majority of them share, like all Britons, against those that commit these vile actions and vile sexual abuse. This is not only backed by recent polling by opinion that shows Muslims are deeply concerned, the majority of them about grooming gangs, but by sermons in mosques, lectures from leading figures, demonstrations on the street, and so much more, often not given the media coverage that they deserve. I am pleased to see the National Crime Agency will be involved in the future inquiry, and let me reiterate in this House that British Muslims stand on the side of victims and support the full force of the law against all perpetrators of abuse. But would the Home Secretary agree with me that those that display selective outrage or fan the flames to blame entire communities do nothing to protect innocent victims or further the cause of victims? Can I welcome my honourable friend's points that she makes about the anger in her community, the anger across British Muslim communities towards the grooming gangs, towards the rape of children, towards these appalling crimes, and the work that she has long called for, including stronger action from the police to be able to go after perpetrators and bring them to justice. She is right that this is shared right across communities. It's a horror at crimes committed against children and particularly against young girls. It is in the interest of those children and of those victim survivors that we have reforms now.
The other first select committee, Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for the response of it. I'm pleased also that Baroness Casey agreed to come before the committee tomorrow to set out her more clearly to us. And I'm concerned about the potential for inquiries trying to get to the truth, potentially prejudicing criminal trials. So could she set out how she envisages the two things running alongside each other, an inquiry and criminal prosecution? I welcome that question from the committee chair, and I'm glad that Baroness Casey will have the opportunity to set out more details of her findings. As the chair will know,
ensure that where there are current criminal investigations underway, they are not cut across, but so that we also ensure that we can uncover where there have been institutional failings, because if there's institutional failings to pursue action or to turn a blind eye towards action that needs to be pursued in particular areas as part of those local investigations and as part of the national inquiry. You'll know that these kind of arrangements have been done in inquiries in the past, so they can be done and will need to be so again now.
John David.
Yeah, first I want to praise and pay tribute to survivors from right across the country, and again highlight the survivors who worked in Telford alongside myself and other organisations to do that local based review. The reason we did a local based review was because the then Home Secretary Amber Rudd and the then local government minister Rishi Sunak refused to provide a statutory inquiry into Telford, and that's why we worked together with the Police and Crime Commissioner, who happens to be a Conservative, and people from across the political spectrum to take this out of the party political field and try and find answers in our small part of the world. Mr. Speaker, what we do need though is action. Action in regards to the Jade inquiry, action in regards to the Casey review, but also, as Home Secretary, the number of local reviews that have taken place up and down this country that have not been on the desks of ministers over the last 14 years and have not therefore received the attention that they deserve. Does she agree?
My honourable friend is right to say what we need is change and action. Recommendations from inquiries need to be implemented. The Telford inquiry that took place, and part of its strength was that it involved victims and survivors at the very heart of the inquiry, and also have serious plans to ensure that the recommendations were then taken forward and implemented, and had ways in which to follow up to make sure that those recommendations were implemented. That is crucial. It's no good just having inquiries where recommendations sit on a shelf. We have to make sure that they are implemented alongside pursuing answers.
Robin Moore.
And can I just start by saying that the fact that victims and survivors of this horrific crime have quite literally had to become campaigners themselves to reach this outcome is something that should make everybody in this house stop and think. When I last met the Safeguarding Minister with leading child abuse lawyer David Greenwood, we pointed out that there is a fundamental flaw in her own government's grooming gang strategy, and that was the completely ridiculous decision to give council leaders in areas like Keighley and the wider Bradford district the option to simply say no to inquiry. So now that we have an inquiry equipped with statutory powers, can I ask the Home Secretary, what message does she have for local leaders in my region who think that they can still get away with saying no? And what message does she have to say to victims like Fiona Goddard, who is also from my area, who no doubt will be worrying, like me, that there will still be on Keighley and the wider Bradford district?
Well, I know that the honourable member has met with the Safeguarding Minister. She has also spoken again to Fiona Goddard this morning to ensure that the work that they have been doing and to make sure that victims and survivors' voices and campaigners' voices are heard at the heart of this. I think you will also know that the Safeguarding Minister did say to him in that meeting that she would not allow local councils to be able to turn their backs and to say no to investigations where they are needed. That is why we have accepted Baroness Casey's recommendation for a national inquiry that will underpin those local investigations. We will ensure, obviously, final decisions will be matters for the independent chair of the commission, but we will ensure that his concerns and those of victims are passed on to the national inquiry.
Debbie Abraham.
Mr. Speaker, and I make my right on with your statement. I'd also like to pass on my thanks to Jamie Casey for meeting with Oldham victims of and survivors of CSE. They want no further delays to justice and for perpetrators to face the full face of the law now. It is unacceptable that some are being given court dates of 2028 with all the risk that implies. They want no more red tape. They want survivors to be at the heart of rooting out these perpetrators and getting justice. And the Home Secretary ensure that this will happen, and will she now consider making misogyny a hate crime?
I welcome the work that my honourable friend has done through very many years to champion victims in Oldham, to champion victims across her constituency, and to work with survivors as well. She is right to point to the terrible delays in the justice system. She will know that the Lord Chancellor is taking forward reforms to look at how the huge backlog, particularly in Crown Court cases, can be dealt with, because justice delayed is justice denied, and already so many survivors have waited far too long for justice. I can assure her that those concerns are very much uppermost in the Lord Chancellor's mind.
Where there's been local inquiries commissioned by councils, will there be an opportunity for those same areas to fall under the remit of this national inquiry to ensure that some of the issues that the Home Secretary herself references today are still ongoing, are caught within the new framework of the new inquiry?
The question you raise is an important one, and ultimately the final decisions will need to be for the independent chair of the commission. That's what happens when we set it up as a national inquiry rather than a government process. But you will know that, for example, there have been concerns raised around investigations, inquiries that have taken place around Greater Manchester, having final areas that they were not able to compel or to get to the bottom of. They have worked as a result with the Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Policing to be able to pursue the final stages of investigation inquiry, and we did look at whether there were other powers, either through local government acts or through in police inspection powers. However, the simplest way to address this is for it to be done through the national inquiry, and he will be able to make representations around his area, so will any other entities be able to make representations on their too.
By welcoming the statement and the absolute determination of Baroness Casey and this government to hold the perpetrators to account and to hold account those who may have been involved in cover-ups. One of the recommendations that comes through in the report is around the confusion between different agencies. A particular element around that is around taxi licensing and taxis from out-of-town areas. And I know just from my own city of Peterborough, the challenge both to law-abiding, decent taxi drivers undercut by different licensing laws, but also law enforcement and the safety of passengers where we have plates from different areas. I know that's one of the recommendations. Can my honourable friend give us more details of how we will move at speed to create a national level playing field so that passengers are safe and drivers have the support they need to keep everyone safe?
I welcome that point from my honourable friend, because as he will know, there are many local authorities across the country who have worked to ensure that they raise standards and checks in their licensing arrangements, particularly those in areas where there have been serious problems and where there have been criminal cases that have taken place. However, those checks and safeguards can end up being undermined by the licensing of taxis in other areas that do not have those checks. So we are looking to be able to take forward reforms to the law. The Transport Secretary is looking at exactly this issue to make sure we can find a way forward to close that loophole.
Speaker, as a survivor of child sexual abuse myself, I stand in solidarity with the many victims and survivors as the system has failed over many, many years. And I can say that the horror, trauma, the guilt never leaves you, and I so hope that every survivor who is identified here receives the mental health support and otherwise that they deserve to rebuild their lives. Survivors have witnessed very many promises, 20 recommendations, and the call of never again, time and again. What will the Home Secretary do, and how will she reassure them that this won't be another one of those examples? And can I just say, too, that I am really let down and disgusted that the Leader of the Opposition began her remarks with assault, victims and survivors deserve more than a smug, I told you so diatribe.
Sarah Merchant.
Right, automatically.
I love the top weekly prize of £2,000 and the chance to win £25,000 4 times a year.
I love the price. So my head is bushy, yeah, from
The bit that I care most about is my hair. If it looks good, I feel absolutely brilliant. I would definitely recommend Planter 39. Planter 39 caffeine shampoo. Try it for your menopause. Today, we'll see two. Let's have protection. Join Jamie. These new one-pound recipes.
Minimal ingredients, maximum flavour. Happy days.
Jamie's one-pound wonders. Starts Tuesday, 24th of June on Food Network.
My whole life has been about driving, about accepting 1.6 seconds. This is it. This is the moment I wanted.
Brand new Tom Daly 1.6 seconds. Stream now on Discovery Plus.
One. Two.
Superman sponsors on Visible
3. 4. 5.
You want football?
keep playing.
6.
Oh.
7.
Marcia was acting more strange than usual. She was becoming very reclusive. I always remember being given some
Bundles of
McMurray
100.
Award at
700.
Ford University,
10 minutes
and
worth.
I was just told to come to the awards ceremony, and Graham and Mom just happened to come. But the only notable thing is that Granddad didn't come. It was just Graham. And she also started signing cards, just Graham. So suddenly his name was omitted from the cards, and he wasn't attending things that he otherwise would have been attending.
as time went on, I got that Larry was very quiet. Marshall wouldn't talk much, of course he didn't anyway, but I mean even more so, wouldn't talk much about anything. Would sit by himself, not really interacting with her that much. And told me that she would go home after dark and he'd be sitting in the living room with no lights on, laying back in the recliner.
I didn't even care, to be honest with you. You know, that's a sorry statement to say that about your father, but that's the truth. In 2004, Cindy and I decided to start our own business called All Cool Refrigerant Reclaim. Mom, she was so proud of us for doing that. One of the things I needed was a large processing tank. It cost $12,500. Never, ever had the intention of asking Mom for money. But she says to me, I want to buy you.
Marshall was just furious about that. I believe that it caused a really big rift between Marshall and Ann. He never really let it go.
Despite her relationship problems, Anne finds solace in her love for her granddaughters.
Frankie graduated in 2008. Well, Uncle Jack couldn't come up on the bleachers because of his cancer, and so he needed to sit down on the floor level, and Graham was going to sit down there with him. And I remember Granddad getting really irritated.
He just acted like a child, and he was just mad, and he left. He left them there. This was something that he had never done before. He had never put Mom in a situation to where she had to choose between him and her grandchildren. And she was furious about that.
Everything started going really downhill after Frankie's graduation. Anne would call me crying. And, but she wouldn't really get into the reason, just that her and Marshall were having problems. I started to really worry about her. The following week, Marshall called Pat and left a message telling him that he was the reason for all of his and Anne's problems.
Then it turned into more threats to where he's calling the shop and threatening my life. He said he was going to shoot me and kill me.
What are you doing? I remember being scared and confused because this was new information to me. I did not know this part of his personality. So it was suddenly like trying to put two completely different people together. You know, this granddad that I'd always had, and then this essentially monster.
Things were getting bad. So I had called Mom the next day and talked to her, and I said, Mom, get out of there and you need to stay away.
Anne was afraid with him having guns that he would hurt her or some of her family. She told me she was going to go and search and find all the guns in the house and get them out of there. I was afraid that he might catch her.
She was more concerned about the handguns versus the long rifle. And I want to say it was 5 handguns. She threw them out the back window while he was sleeping. She brought them up to me. I told her that she missed one. And she argued with me and she said, no, I got them all. I said, nope, you missed one.
Dan came to stay with me. I live in a secure building, so I knew he couldn't get in. But it was frightening to go out the door because he knew where I lived. He'd been there several times. Marshall would call and leave all kinds of nasty messages and threaten us both. He wanted his money and his guns.
If they weren't threatening calls, they were calling, apologizing, saying, please forgive me, come back. And unfortunately for Mom, every time that you got the apology call, she fell into it.
She was concerned for him and felt bad for him that he was by himself. She went and took him to the doctor because he didn't have any other way to get there.
She wasn't making the best decisions for herself because of his control over her and his pull over her.
Anne returns to the house several times, including on September 29, 2009.
Come and get it. Better go on. Come on, get in, we gotta make sure we, all right. Hey, come back.
Grandma's going back to the house for turtles. They're pretty self-sufficient, but they still need to be, their water needs to be changed, and they still need to be fed every few days.
I told her I was scared for her to go back. I worried about her the whole time. And she told me, she said, I've got my phone right on my side. And I leave it on all the time. We had coffee together. And I left to go to work. And told her I'd see her later.
Oh, I've just got Sun Life's guaranteed over 50 plan. Super easy, no medical questions. I finally have the confidence to devote myself to my craft.
What?
I even made this.
Really?
With Sun Life, there's a guaranteed cash payout. But this is one less thing you'll have to spend it on.
Search Sunlight Plan today and get a free gift card.
Tired of freestanding wardrobes that just don't fit? Add Sharp's redesigned bespoke fitted furniture like no one else, transforming bedrooms into beautifully organized spaces. Our exclusive Space Plus system means we won't be beaten on space. You'll get twice the space of freestanding wardrobes, plus you get our 15-year guarantee of total peace of mind. The unmissable Sharps half-price event is here with your free no-obligation design visit today at sharps.co.uk.
Treat yourself to fast and reliable broadband with PlusNet. With a sweet deal on full fibre 145 for only $25.99 a month. That's plenty of speed for your home. Ooh, hint. And no activation fees. That's a plus. Really sweet one. Call us now or visit plus.net for our best price. Offer ends 2nd of July. Ah, go on then.
At Park Dean Resort, we're all about together time. Hours of non-stop playtime. Splashing in pool time. Proper bonding time. With more beaches nearby, breathtaking locations across the UK, and tons to do. It's easy to enjoy together time with Park Dean Resort. Book today.
The bit that I care most about is my hair. And if it looks good, I want to be rude. I use Classic 39 UV capping formula on the days I don't wash my hair. I just apply the formula directly on my scalp and rinse out here. Sneak it on and style is normal. Done. With Classic 39, I can really feel the effects. Classic 39 UV formula. Try it for your menopause journey.
Elvie have always made it simple for me. Great value car insurance. So I can get them for £349. Elvie.com. Sometimes it's not time for some tomboy. It's enjoying the Italian time. Or time to visit your nan time. Put it on down.
Yep, that's my dad. You're probably wondering how he got here.
Hello, darling. Don't forget it's the bins on Tuesday. Mom, wait. Have you got air alert? Air alert? Yeah, it's an easy. Just call, cost you a fortune.
It's okay. You're on the right side.
No, we're not.
Okay, go kids. Hand it over.
What searches the physiological
Don't play dumb. It's Tango. Most powerful flavour on the strip. Send him to the heart.
Get back to the cell.
Save up to £462 in your car insurance when you just use Confused.com. If you've dedicated your life to their care, leave a legacy that does the same for the gift of Battersea in your will. Search Battersea Gift in Will to find out more.
There are people in this world who are patently evil.
The greatest.
You got a hunter. He's cold as ice.
American detective.
The body count is going to continue to rise. They had a feeling this wasn't going to end well, and they were right.
Brian Eno, American detective with Lieutenant Joe Kender. Starts Saturday at 9 on Quest Red.
Kickstart the week with the most gripping true crime here on Quest Red. Murder Chose Me is at 9. Then at 10, behind hospital doors, trust turns to murder in the new episode of Nurses Who Care.
kill. Then security footage reveals a disturbing revelation in tonight's murder on CCTV at 11.
Superman sponsors on Visible Entertainment.
Police charge emergency. I just shot my wife. Excuse me? I just shot my wife. On purpose? We fighting over a gun that went off and she dead. Okay, and your name is Marshall? Okay, where's the gun at now? 4. How long did this happen? Over an hour. It was over an hour ago? Yeah. Okay, we have officers around.
When officers arrived on scene, they located Marshall Metz on the front porch. He told the uniformed officers that his wife had been shot accidentally and that she was inside. When the uniformed officers entered the residence, they found a rifle that was laying on the couch to the right. Also, a semi-automatic handgun with the magazine laying on the table. As they proceeded further into the residence, they saw the victim. She had a blanket covering her. They removed the blanket and saw 2 bullet holes, one on each side of her chest.
While Marshall Metz is questioned, Anne is rushed to the hospital.
Unfortunately, Anne was pronounced dead shortly after we arrived at the hospital.
I was actually in the shop, hoping disposables. I can see myself doing it right now. And Cindy called me and say, hey, your mom's in the hospital and you need to come in. I could feel it in my heart that something bad had happened, and we got the girls in there. We had Phyllis come in, Kathy came in.
My dad and my mom are there with a police officer, and they told me that Graham was dead, that she was gone. I also remember asking where Granddad was, and that's when I found out that he shot her. I started screaming. I started talking about how I was going to kill him. I remember them like trying to ground me and me stopping, but still being, hysterical.
Mom was a good lady. She would do anything to help people. She would do anything to help a neighbor. And it just breaks my heart that she's not here.
Having complained of chest pain, Marshall is also taken to the hospital under police guard.
Marshall stated that him and Anne had been married for some time. They're currently separated, but that she had come over to feed her box turtle. While they were speaking, they got into an argument. The argument became heated. Marshall said that Anne had pulled a handgun from a drawer and that Marshall then tried to get the gun away from Anne. The gun went off. Anne grabbed the rifle. They then struggled over the rifle and Anne had fallen to the ground at that point. He then covered her with a blanket and then waited an hour to call 911. To wait an hour when literally seconds and minutes mattered for someone's survival is exceedingly suspicious. It makes it much more looks like a homicide than it would an accidental shooting.
I knew when he said, they wrestled over the gun. It was a bunch of malarkey. It was all his story made up to make him look like he was defending himself. It's just hard to believe that he would do that to him, as cold as he did, and then covering her up and waiting for her to die. It's nothing but evil.
He lets her lay on the floor for an hour
It was just horrible. How could you let her lay there? How could you let her just lay there?
A short time later, the search warrant was completed and signed and authorized by a circuit court judge. Detectives entered the residence. When you look at a case like this or any case, you try to look at consistency, you try to look at what fits and what matches and what makes sense. The house was immaculate. Everything had a place, it was very well kept, very well organized. Marshall said that Anne had removed the handgun from the drawer underneath the computer. However, there was no room in this drawer for a handgun. Since everything else in the house had a place, it seemed rather unusual that he would keep a handgun in a drawer that just didn't fit. He said he kept the rifle in the corner next to the computer. I mean, there were no marks on the wall, no scratches, there was no marks, no dings. That was just another thing that just didn't really make sense with what Marshall had told us versus what we had found.
The following morning, detectives reviewed the forensics report.
When a firearm is discharged, a round comes out, but behind that round is gases, unburned gunpowder. So at close contact, those gases and particles go out and will burn the human skin, will burn clothing. Marshall indicated that the round struck Anne during the struggle, but Anne did not have any of those powder burns on her clothing or on her skin. That would indicate Marshall was several feet away, at least when the rounds were discharged. Marshall's version of events was not true. We obtained an arrest warrant for Marshall for first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and the warrant was served on Marshall. It was difficult to not look at the facts of the case and not reach the conclusion that it was a purposeful act. But there wasn't really a lot of known information as far as this being a premeditated act or not.
The lack of proof of premeditation could mean the difference between a life sentence and as little as 15 years imprisonment.
There's no doubt in my mind, he knew what he was going to do, period. And he was not going to get away with that.
I believe that when Anne arrived at the house, that Marshall had every intention of shooting her and killing her that day. But we needed evidence. A few days after the incident, there was an unexpected turn of events. Detectives received a phone call from Marshall's financial advisor. He stated that Marshall called him the day before the homicide and wanted his 401k cashed out. So the financial advisor closed the account and the check was quoted in the mail for around $14,000. If you look at a plan that he would have, he'd probably need money. He needed a lawyer. So that was a big breakthrough to show that Marshall did do this on purpose and that it was premeditated.
Good morning, everyone. Please be seated.
Good morning, Your Honor. On behalf of the state, Marshall Metz, K09-47109.
The trial of Marshall Metz begins on September 8th, 2010.
Every single time he was in the courtroom, we were there. I think I only missed one day.
Granddad just looked mean, and he looked angry, and he just looked completely different than the person that I remember. I mean, it almost is like he exuded evil.
He didn't look sorry at all. He didn't look upset at all. He didn't care what he had done to Anne. I wanted to jump over there and just slap him down, but I knew I couldn't.
If you just take a look at the crime itself, it's the ultimate act of domestic violence, the ultimate act of abuse, and he killed her.
At the time of the crime, I was the elected state's attorney for Frederick County, Maryland. I was the lead prosecutor.
You're talking about a truly brutal murder.
We were very confident that we could disprove his self-defense claim.
This was not a woman who pulled a gun on Mr. Metz after she was shot and went back for another weapon. That's not what happened.
Marshall Metz had no defensive wounds on him whatsoever. something that you might see in a struggle. We called to the stand a ballistics firearms examiner who essentially testified that the gunshots had to occur from a distance of at least 4 feet or more. Marshall Metz's version of the story could not have taken place.
For the first degree murder, we have to prove that it was deliberate, that it was willful, that it was premeditated. I wanted to start by giving the jury a little picture of what her life was like. He was a very jealous man. Marshall Metz wanted full control over her, and if he couldn't have her, then nobody else could. He got that handgun, and he threatened her with it, and she probably was trying to leave, and he shot her. I think the gun jammed. He couldn't shoot her again to finish it, and he grabbed the rifle, and then he shot her again. And then he just left her there on the floor to die.
He waits an hour to call 911. An hour as this woman died. What a horrific act.
And then finally, we called to the stand a financial advisor who testified that Marshall Metz told him the day before the murder that he wanted to liquidate this investment account. You could see the jury basically just shake their heads. They knew that Marshall Metz made the decision to take her life, and that's exactly what happened.
They did not put him on the stand. The defense called zero witnesses. They had nothing.
We brought the jury in. They had a verdict. And it was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of first-degree homicide. The family just began crying.
I remember relief at the guilty verdict, but also just confusion.
You sit on Papa's lap.
You have someone that does something so horrible, but they weren't that person for you for so many years. It's really hard to just like flip a switch and it's all gone.
Wait, Daddy. Hi, Papa. Hey, Daddy.
As happy as I was to know that he was going to be punished, it didn't make Mom being gone, it didn't make it any easier. It was tough. It still is. All these years later, it's still tough.
Your Honor, the first person that wishes to address Your Honor would be Jimmy Trout.
Just before sentencing, Junie and Shannon get the chance to read impact statements.
Every day, I see Mom's face on our refrigerator, our house walls, in the shop, and at my computer. I see her face in both of my daughter's eyes. My family has built a life that would have been impossible without her baby. Mom was with me every step of the way my entire life.
I turn back tears every time I realize she isn't there and never will be again. We will not be at my college graduation or there the day we married. Longer back when you could possibly imagine.
He was shrugging it off, kind of half smirking, acting like it was no big deal.
And then the judge gave Marshall a chance to talk, and such filth that came from his mouth.
I love my wife. I love her very much, and everybody knows it. And my wife shot herself, and Jimmy Trout killed her. He robbed us of the day one. Took all my wife's money for 25 years.
He was projecting his miserable life on me because I was the only target that he could come after.
The judge finally told him, okay, that's enough. And she sentenced him.
He got life without the possibility of parole, and he got an extra 20 years. And we feel the extra 20 years was tacked on simply for him standing up and projecting his miserable life onto me.
Just goes to show you that you really don't know people that you think you know, or you don't know what they can become. which to me, Marshall became evil.
I think we've done a good job at continuing to remember her and what a good person she is. I'd like to think that someday maybe I'll forgive him and I want to end up in heaven. But as of right now, I don't think that's possible for me. And you know, he is a true monster.
It's sort of like to see where we are now, in the history of where we come from. My only hope is that the game continues to grow. Women Rugby 1.
Reclaim the game. Stream the full series now, only on Discovery Plus.
Trash the cash, baby.
These flippers take on the impossible.
Whatever they're scared of, we're not.
Wow. Absolutely, yeah. Flipping Impossible. Thursday at 9 on HGTV.
Everybody is looking for love. It's going to be an adventure.
A new naughty day to be wild about.
Who is this girl?
You gotta be kidding me, man.
Answer with me, embarrassed myself, guaranteed.
I don't want to just hook up. I want something more. You never know what's going to happen next in this place. Let's see how that goes.
Brand new 30-day Hunt for Love. A new episode every week, only on Discovery Plus. After the public unraveling of her own marriage, Elizabeth Chambers now investigates the toxic dynamics that tear us apart and helps victims break free. Join Quest Red for the all-new series of Toxic, Wednesday night at 10.
Diane was very bubbly and personable, wasn't afraid to speak to anyone about anything ever.
When she first got married, she found her Prince Charming and everything was going to be good. I think he tried in the beginning.
But things got ugly really fast.
I think she was kind of trapped at that point.
I was a baby who just saw my dad kill my mom.
It's Christmas Eve, 1995. David and Diane Malone celebrate their first Christmas together as a married couple.
She used to have like Christmas Eve at my house every year. I
One on, sir.
Name and number.
Not my name. Damn you fucking loser.
Keep those men back. And go clear them up. All right, fine.
John, chapter that chance.
I'm gutted.
What's the doc saying that you're for a walk?
Enough, sir.
Come on. That's it, John. What's your fault? Don't push these Geordies. Come on, let's go. Hold up, hold up. What are you trying to get at me? Hey, John, you don't want to burn in there, do you?
Leave all that stuff and you'll be out of work.
Yeah, thank you.
You're in our security wing now, my vicar. Well, I'm trouble here.
Well, make sure you because I'll put a tool right in your belly.
You've another 30 days of your punishment still to do.
Don't bring no special case for me. Because there ain't no way I'll get my liberty. I'm back inside, I'm being betrayed. Now I know this is the greatest robbery. I'll wake and watch the morning break. I get the feeling like there's no way back. You see me here again. You better find another man to take the blame. Get laid. I better stay down and get myself in shape.
What's your property, McVicker? Tomorrow you're on normal routine. Stop open, bigger.
Look up, Colin. Yeah, cheers, Hannah. Morning, Harry. Hello, Roy. How long have you been in here then?
I'm fucking long.
You know, Collins.
Church been played, Mr. Pennington. Only before Collins, reasons they could only be excused on Monday and Hey, Billy, you heard the news? Look, Mr. Pennington.
I have discovered another lady in the Durham Light Infantry.
The Durham Light Infantry was the fastest marching regiment in Britain.
About an old barrack load. Each other.
That French film on the radio last night.
Sunk to the nuts, they were.
180 paces to the minute.
They're going to rename them, you know.
You'd have told me, you'd have told.
The Durham Bumpers.
Oh, do not arsehole these Geordies. There's no push in the gear they
Yes,
said.
she's there, Terry.
Why don't you fuck off, Collins?
Aren't you where you're going?
Fucking... Tip it, go.
This bread is ours, Rob. What's this, fucking wedding cake again? As far as you'll get, what do you do? You eat all that leftover every night?
All right, John.
I do, then, son.
Nice to meet you, John. Heard all about you. You for the life out of Jeffers just now, growling at him like he's a sex case, Ronnie. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think someone's upstairs. Cody and Bob. Now, if they show their faces, they get up right straight away. But Jeffers ain't really a sex case. Never tampered with the kids. He just killed them.
And that's all right with you, is it?
He is in the Sakana.
Go
Listen, go for a cup of tea, tidy up the cells. I'll put you on his list. Not for me, Ronnie.
Oh, Robbie Harris, John, doing a tenner with me.
All right, John?
Oh, Adam in charge of electrodes. You know what I mean? Jimmy Collins, doing a 15 for her bank, she got the phone.
So what?
Morning, John.
Yeah, well, you don't mix with those things, do you?
Well, sometimes it's hard not to, John.
Come on, hurry it up, Rebecca.
Prisoners away! Lewison, let him down!
Breakfast, Cody.
Operator, I'd like to book a call through to Rio.
You wouldn't hesitate to kill.
Imogen James.
Fucking lovely this people, huh? Appreciate all the more after reading this.
Don't let him worry you, mate.
5 minutes. Yeah, I'll wait.
Figure comes from this and father was an alcoholic. The British Journal of Criminology. What is missing?
This stuff is so illiterate. It's so bloody disordered. I'd like to keep this as evidence of what these idiots are trying out. Hey, I'll fight you.
Took me about 3 hours to think of that.
Oh, of course. Come on, then. Well, show those Geordie flags they can't get up down, but turn off the fucking lights. Let's go. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love London town. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I think of her. I get a funny feeling inside of me. Because I'm a Londoner, and I think of her wherever I go. Harris? What do you want? A prison director from the Home Office has arrived. He wants to speak to you.
What's his name?
Mr. Jackson. Let's go, he's all right. Look, if Billy knows him, we'll go and have a word with him.
I'll second that.
Yeah, don't we'll say plenty, John, plenty. I'll get a petition up.
Hello, Johnson.
Sir?
So how are we going to manage this settlement, then, eh?
Here's our petition. It's reasonable.
We never find it necessary to do this in your nick, do we?
Johnson, you know I can't bargain with you, but you know me, and I tell you this petition will be given very serious consideration. Of course, if these disturbances were to continue, then the tone of this petition, which seems somewhat conciliatory, will be held in question. But if you were to come out quietly now, it will be studied very carefully indeed.
And what about the warders with riot sticks?
I give you my word there will be no personal violence against any single prisoner.
I'll see what the lads say.
Look, if we come after Jackson, I reckon we get our own way with him.